William Blackstone was the author of a 4-volume textbook on English law. Okay, well, I'm Wilfrid Prest. I'm a historian. I used to have a lot of difficulties about saying that, but I think probably I can say now I am a historian. Certainly the most influential law book in the English language, arguably even the most influential law book of all time. Blackstone is now being cited by counsel and the judiciary in the US Supreme Court at a rate that is only equalled by his citation in the early 19th century. So there's been a huge resurgence of interest. He's really the starting point to which you go if you want to understand what the common law was when the United States became an independent country. But also Blackstone has statements about individual human rights which are still of considerable relevance. The first volume of the Commentaries on the Laws of England came out in November 1765. That's 249 years from now. Next year is the 250th anniversary of the first appearance of the Commentaries.
I think it was the historian Gibbon who said that the common law was once the horror of all men of taste.
Yes, indeed, yes.
What did that mean?
Well, I think it meant that the common law was a barbarous mess. It was presented in a jargon, a mixture of Latin and Norman French and bits of English thrown in, and presented as a collection of procedures which were necessary to obtain remedies for injuries suffered. But the links, the coherence between these various remedies, forms of action is a technical term, was not at all clear, because these things had all grown up over a long period of time, very long period of time, and it was all buried within the workings of the legal profession. Blackstone provided an overview which presented the law as a rational and a efficient and socially based code of conduct, means of regulating social relations. Blackstone actually says himself in Book 3, the law is like the Gothic castle. It's got all sorts of strange anomalies, but when you actually look at how they work, you realise that despite all the incrustations and oddities, there is a perfectly habitable set of apartments within this Gothic exterior, encrusted with all these fictions and odd procedures. And this was done in an extremely literate and compellingly well-written prose. He tinkered. He was a wordsmith. He tinkered with his text to get it right, to get it clear. When Blackstone announces his course of lectures, he announces them as fee-paying lectures. If you want to go to these lectures, you've got to pay 6 guineas a year, I think was the sum. He wanted to appeal to the widest possible audience, and so he, from the very start, said these lectures were not intended to go into the minute details which would be necessary for someone preparing to become a practicing lawyer, although they'd be useful as an introduction, but they were as much intended for those who wanted a general map.
There were a contemporary actor who would play Blackstone. Who would it be?
One of the things about Blackstone is that he's a rather chubby chap. You can see in that image, he doesn't have a lean and hungry look about him exactly. He is described sometimes as being a bit overbearing. I suppose Orson Welles might be the person you'd have to think about.
How is Blackstone's life and work like the treasure of the Sierra Madre?
His quest is for justice. He believes that the English law has as its aim justice, but that the law, as he encountered it, was such a mess, such a jumble, it was very hard to see that it was in fact serving the ends of justice. He believed that his restatement of the law would indeed help to achieve that end. But I think also it's important to look at Blackstone's own life story. He's a posthumous son. His father dies before he's born. His father dies leaving a very large debt from his business as a silk merchant in London's Cheapside to his mother, who has to try and trade her way out of this. She dies before Blackstone's 12 years old. A lot of Blackstone's achievement comes from a drive to, as it were, justify himself, to show that he's in a way better than his father.
Was he changed by that quest?
I think he became a more tolerant person. I think as a young man he might have been a bit of a prig. He was a tremendously high achiever at school. He was a scholarship boy at a very good London school, the Charterhouse. He topped the entire school by the age of 15. He probably wasn't terribly popular with his peers, and some people thought that he could be quite an obnoxious person by insisting upon what he thought was right. But I think in particular his religious attitudes became more tolerant. I also think he became increasingly concerned about the state of the English criminal law. He was not happy about the reliance on capital punishment as the ultimate sanction, and he is actually responsible for the first legislative enactment in England of a system of penal justice through prison. It was quite a significant achievement, and a reflection of a growing humanity, if you like.
How is Blackstone's life or legacy like Mutiny on the Bounty?
Well, I don't see Blackstone in a particularly maritime role, but there is certainly a rivalry plot which commences with the attendance of the young Jeremy Bentham as a student at his last set of law lectures in Oxford before he publishes the Commentaries, which are based on these lectures. And the young Jeremy Bentham, who was an extremely clever and ambitious young man, if you wanted to engage in a bit of, as you call, psychosocial analysis, Blackstone becomes a sort of father figure against which the young Jeremy stages an Oedipal rebellion.
Will you men get up with your hand for it?
Bentham presents in 1776, the year of the American Revolution, he presents his case against or his first indictment against Blackstone, a short piece called The Fragment on Government, which consists of a scarifying analysis of the opening pages of Book 1 of the Commentaries, prefaced by a more wide-ranging but less intensive attack on other aspects of the book. Bentham's case is basically that Blackstone is simply justifying the status quo, that he's got no interest whatever in reforming the law, which Bentham says with considerable justification is a mess, and that all Blackstone is doing is whitewashing and saying that everything that exists is as good as it could possibly be, if not better. This is a caricature and total distortion, but it's a very effective caricature.
I see me adrift 3,500 miles from a port of call. You're sending me to my doom, eh? Well, you're wrong.
He believes in gradual change. Bentham, after about 1800, becomes what we would call a radical. He wants fundamental change. He thinks the structure is so rotten it must be destroyed entirely and replaced with something altogether new. Blackstone doesn't want to do that. Bentham's recipe for change was actually rather less successful than Blackstone's, and codification in the sort of sweeping way that Bentham advocated it has not been a great success story. Blackstone is responsible for setting up in his college, All Souls College, not only the great Codrington Library, which was standing there as a shell when he arrived. He was responsible for finishing it, furnishing it, setting it up as a working library, which it still is today. But he was also responsible for the fact that beneath that library there was a very extensive cellar system. He populated this cellar with wine bottles, and he arranged for the wine to be bought in bulk, to be bought in barrels, and then bottled in the college. He was pretty keen on the wine himself. Boswell's Life of Johnson, I think, refers to the fact that Blackstone composed his commentaries with a bottle of port at his elbow. This statement caused some concern to Blackstone's family. After his death, they remonstrated with James Boswell, who changed the wording and said that he made temperate use of port to keep up his energy, really, while he was engaged in the throes of literary composition. That's fair enough, that's as it may be, but if you look at the inventory that was taken at his death, the contents of Sir William's cellar were not inconsiderable.
This was special. This is a copy of the first edition that is still untrimmed in the original pasteboard boards. This is really how the commentaries looked when it came away from the printer, and was sold. People would have these rebound, they would be trimmed. But this is the way it originally worked. There's only 2 other copies
in the world
that we know of. There's one at the Law Library at Berkeley, and one in the special collections at the University of at SUNY Buffalo.
but it doesn't get more original than that.
No, and this is also has a great provenance. This is from the collection of Bradley Martin, one of the great American book collectors of the 20th century.
What I'd like to do now is ask you some unusual questions.
Yes, of course. Yes,
and
I
let's
know you do that. Yes. Yes. I've seen some of your videos. Yes.
Good. So,
Yes.
so we'll see what we can do with this.
Oh, sure.